Okay, maybe I can ask you if I could ask you to introduce yourself to start with, just really briefly.
Right.
Where you work, what you've been doing, what your profession is, just to start off.
Okay, my name's Stefan Zaitschenko. I was a project engineer, electrical project engineer at British Steel, Chorus and Tata for 37 years. So I worked all around the UK, building new capital investments. I left 5 years ago at the age of 55, took early retirement, and since then I've been teaching high voltage engineering and generators for a private company. Recently, about 18 months ago, we saw lots of activity with the British Steel pension scheme, and my colleague Richard Caddy set up the initial Facebook group, and I joined the group this year, and we have been looking after 5,000 members now and helping them with the decisions they have to take because of the changes to the British Steel pension scheme. That scheme has 127,000 members, 82,000 of them in receipt of pension, and we've been giving them advice on how they take their decision on whether they should remain and go forward into the new scheme or go into the government set up scheme, what is known as the lifeboat scheme, for schemes that are under difficulty because the parent sponsor is failing.
Right. Maybe for people who are not familiar with the situation, maybe you could describe what happened a year and a half ago.
Yes. Well, Tata India purchased Chorus in 2008. And since 2008, obviously, we had the financial crash. And in the last 9 years, the steel companies in the UK have not been profitable. So Tata India took the decision that they were intending to sell off their assets in the UK. Alongside the company is a very large pension fund with assets of £15 billion. And the asset value of the pension is very, very much bigger than the asset value of the trading company, Tata Steel UK. Tata Steel UK had a number of facilities in the northeast and central England and Wales. Tata transferred some of its assets to Liberty Steel and other assets to Greybull Investing for about £1, and showed a loss from those assets of around £200 million on the India when they reported it to the Indian stock market. They retained Wales, the Welsh Group. The Welsh Group makes strip steel, and we have a facility in Holland as well, which is strip steel, cold rolled strip, coiled strip. These assets are seen as quite valuable and needed to be retained or sold for a good price. That was not proving possible with the trading company still tied to the fund. No potential partner would come in as long as the pension fund was there with its potential risk, because the sponsor in the UK obviously has a legal responsibility to meet any shortfall in the pension fund. That risk is seen too great to the potential partners, and in particular, ThyssenKrupp. ThyssenKrupp have been considering a partnership, a joint venture or merger with Tata Steel Europe. which includes Tata Steel UK. ThyssenKrupp were very clear that as long as Tata Steel UK were tied to the British Steel Pension Fund, they couldn't join a partnership. Their intention is to become the second largest steelmaker in Europe. Currently, ArcelorMittal is the largest company. So 18 months ago, Tata Steel looked to the government in the UK to give them the ability to reduce the risk of the pension to the sponsoring company. The defined benefit scheme, which is based on final salary, so for each year we work, we got 1/60th of our final salary, which is, you know, very generous. The defined benefit had inflation indexation was based on quite a high level, what is known as the retail price index. That was unsustainable. Tata had put around 1 billion in additional funding into the scheme over the last 10 years. And it was looking like they were going to have to fund the scheme to about 60 to 100 million pounds for the ongoing future. And this was seen as not sustainable. So they asked the government if they could reduce the benefits, which is against the Pensions Act in the UK, and you know, companies are not allowed to reduce benefits to members without members' consent. And they went out for consultation 18 months ago, and that's how we got involved. That consultation never completed. Their wish was to reduce the benefits, but the rest of the pensions industry saw that any decision taken purely for British Steel pension scheme would have a great potential effect on the other 6,000 defined benefit schemes that are in the UK. The other thing was the government got another priority. At the same day that the consultation completed, Britain voted on Brexit. And after the Brexit vote, the concerns about the British Steel pension scheme was not the highest priority for the government. And of course, we had a change of leadership as well. David Cameron left and Theresa May came in. So it all went quiet for about 6 months. And then in January this year, the government agencies that are involved in this decision, which is the pensions regulator, who regulates all of the pension schemes in the UK, and the Payment Protection Fund that was set up in 2005 as a lifeboat for failing schemes, met with Tata Steel UK and the Department of Work and Pensions, the government department, to negotiate another outcome. They need a legal method to achieve. It couldn't do that. The only option then was for the British Steel pension scheme to be wound up, and for all the 127,000 members through the Payment Protection Fund. So the Payment Protection Fund was set up in 2005 because before that time, if a large scheme failed, the only option was insolvency. And the government recognised at that time that they needed to do something better for members of pensions. The Payment Protection Fund was set up by a government act, but is actually a private concern. It is paid for by levies and insurance fee from the defined benefit schemes. And I say there's 6,000 of them at the moment. So some were a company like British Steel Pension Scheme would pay £15 million per year into the fund as a levy, and they would be given the protection of that fund if they fail. The fund at the moment is worth about £20 billion, and it's quite a large fund. There's a number of companies have gone into it, and it pays all retirees over the age of 65 the same amount they would have got in the original private scheme. Members under 65 take a 10% cut, and that's one way of achieving a solid level of assets in the PPF. PPF also is managed by an investment team, and who make considerable benefit on investments. And it's a very strong scheme at the moment. Now, what was intended with British Steel Pension Scheme was to find a position which was better than the PPF, but not as good as the unsustainable original British Steel Pension Scheme. To do that, the government in the UK have a mechanism called a regulated apportionment arrangement. It's only been used 28 times since it was first announced in 2005. But it's a method by which a company that needs to continue trading is still a strong company and can continue to trade if it severs itself from the pension fund. So it's a mechanism to sever a company from the large liability of a pension fund to allow the company to continue trading. So Tata Steel UK had to demonstrate that if they were not allowed to do this, then they would become insolvent. Now, legally, the responsibility for the pension fund was with Tata Steel UK, the UK subsidiary, not with Tata India, the group, or Tata Sons. So Tata were able to ring fence Tata Steel UK and say they're insolvent. They can't continue trading as long as they did on August the 11th. So on August the 11th this year, the government announced that the RAA would be allowed for the British Steel Pension Scheme. Now, the RAA required Tata Steel UK to pay an apportionment, a proportion of the...
Stefan, I think we missed a few seconds. What's the RAA?
Right. The RAA is a regulated apportionment arrangement. What that means is the apportionment part is that if the British Steel Pension Fund, its assets are £1.5 billion below its future liabilities. So the scheme actuary has looked at the scheme and said, going forward, for the lifetime of all the pensioners, they needed £1.5 billion more than we had in the assets. The RAA allows a company who cannot fund the whole deficit to fund a proportion of the deficit continue trading. So the proportion of debt in Tata UK's example is 550 million, 550 million. So on September the 11th, Tata Steel UK paid 550 million into the assets of British Steel Pension Scheme. And at that point, they no longer have any legal liability. So at this present moment in time, our pension scheme does not have a sponsor company, doesn't have a company behind it. Now, normally that would mean we then transition into the lifeboat, into the PPF. And all of the assets of the pension fund, which is currently 15 billion, would go into the payment protection fund. And then the payment protection fund would take over responsibility for paying the pensions of the British Steel pension scheme members. But under this very rarely used method, the RAA, companies are allowed to offer a successor scheme. And because it's a new scheme, they can set the level of benefits at the legal minimum. The original British Steel pension scheme was a higher level, very generous. So what the British Steel trustees are doing is they're saying the pension scheme is a good pension scheme, very solid. If they can make it a low risk scheme by reducing the benefits and the liabilities, obviously future liabilities, the assets are more than enough to sustain a pension scheme for the future. Now, that has only been allowed on a handful of cases in the past. So we've got 6,000 schemes, and this has been allowed less than 10 times. And we are by far the biggest. Other companies before us were people like Kodak, Eastman Kodak. So what they're doing at the moment, we are in a process of deciding whether we opt to join the new scheme with slightly better, marginally better benefits than the payment protection fund, or we just stay where we are and we will default into the payment protection fund. For me personally, I would lose £3,000 a year going into the PPF. So for me, there's no decision. BSPS2 remains at the same level of pension, but the inflationary increases are less.
Right.
Okay, so that's the major difference. Instead of getting RPI currently is about 4%, I will get CPI, which is capped at 2.5%.
Right.
And the other thing is, in the minimum scheme, anyone with service before 1997 loses any benefit on those years. Right. So there's many older pensioners, many widows, who will get no inflationary increases. Right. Okay, and I lose 20 out of my 37 years was pre-1997. But it is still better than the PPF. Right. And the PPF is better than what was around before the PPF, which was insolvency. Right. Had we become insolvent, it was estimated we would have got 70 pence for every pound. Whereas now, of course, in BSPS2, we keep 100%, and some of us in PPF would have got 90%. Right. In addition to that, there is a third option for people who have not yet retired. And they can take their pension pot, they can get a transfer value and leave the British Steel pension scheme. And we have 42,000 members who could do that. As of October, 11,000 had asked for a transfer value. If all 42,000 left the scheme, they would take approximately £5.5 billion worth of assets. So it is a massive effect on the financial market to see 42,000 people with £5.5 billion suddenly appear on the investment market as a new. I mean, obviously it doesn't compare with large businesses, but for the financial advisors who do this kind of business, it's a massive undertaking. And it's giving quite a lot of difficulties because there just aren't enough qualified financial advisors to look after this business. Okay, so because of this and because of the size of the scheme, British government has taken a lot of interest in what is happening with the British Steel pension scheme. they have been doing for the last 2 years. There's a lot of questions being asked in the Select Committee on Work and Pensions and in the House generally. And I'm sure there'll be a lot discussed and written about what has been learnt from our process and what could be improved on in the future. There have been many difficulties, particularly the communications between the company and the members. And there's been difficulty in getting the information you need to take an informed decision on which choice you should make.
What was your role exactly? I think, Stefan, thanks very much. You've given a really good description. I don't think there's very much more to add as an introduction to what happened. Maybe let me just ask you a couple of questions. What was your role exactly, and when did you get involved?
Right. I mean, to be honest, the people who are involved in doing things here are all just members of the pension scheme. The group was originally set up in May 2016 by Richard Caddy, and when the first consultation was launched by the government into what should be done by the British Steel pension scheme, in May we all received a letter from the British Steel pension trustees informing us that what had been a potential solution was now moving forward to reality. And it was that time that I decided I needed to help other people with this. When I retired 5 years ago, I got a lot of help from the people around me on decisions about pensions and what you should do going forward. Everything, including life insurance plans, investment opportunity, all this. And I remember it was such a confusing state that I decided that I would try and assist by joining the Facebook group.
What's the name of the group?
Sorry?
What's the name of the group again?
It's the British Steel Pension Members group.
Right.
We have two groups. We have the British Steel Pension Members, which is about 5,100 pensioners, and then we have what's called the Deferred Members group. Right. They have the ability to transfer out. Right. So they have specific questions.
Right.
So we separated those out into two groups, but members tend to be in both groups anyway. So this group, we started off giving answers to frequently asked questions, and really just being somebody producing letters to Parliament. So we started doing some lobbying as well. I've got to say the lobbying hasn't been particularly successful, because what we were trying to do was trying to get an improvement of benefits above the legal minimum. So the idea of the group was primarily to support other members who were hearing about the pension scheme for the first time and to get the message out. So we developed a strategy, which was in August, to inform people through local newspapers that this process was taking place. Because the first they were going to hear about it was going to be a glossy newsletter through the door. And when that newsletter came through, it just confused a lot of people. They were being told quite a lot in one glossy fold-up document. They were being told quite a lot. Instead of just being simply told, the British Steel pension scheme is going to change to a new scheme, and that you will be involved and that you will be getting further information. Mm-hmm. It covered a lot more. Now, a lot of what is happening with pensions, of course, a lot of what is being discussed and liabilities and all the jargon with pensions was too much for a lot of our pensioners. So the bulk of the majority of the things we've been dealing with in the last 4 months particularly is been about identifying what is important to each member.
Mm-hmm.
And there are actually 26 different groups of members, depending on whether you're dependent, a widow, you're receiving pension, you're not receiving pension, etc. And so we've been helping with that and to try and clarify what it means in plain English. On October the 1st, individual packs of information was sent out by the British Steel trustees. For retired people, that was 16 pages long, of a lot of technical information, a lot of verbiage, and all you're being asked is, do you want to go into the new scheme or go into PPF? But they provided so much information that it was difficult for many to see the wood for the trees. And for many, it was just a document they couldn't understand, and they just put it to one side. Now, in previous schemes, sorry.
No, it's okay. Carry on. I think.
Yeah. In previous schemes that have gone through this similar process, as I say, like Eastman Kodak and Kodak UK, and a company called Halcro, there was about 10% people defaulted and went into the PPF. Now, for the bulk of those, majority of those, that would have been a financial loss to them. There's two big losses when you go into PPF. If you're under 65, you lose 10%. If you're over 65, it's for the widows. There's 22,500 widows in the British Steel scheme. The PPF pays a lower widow's pension for anyone who took a tax-free lump sum. When we retire, we can take up to 25% of our pension as a lump sum. The British Steel pension scheme pays the widow's pension 50% of the gross value of the pension before the lump sum's taken. The PPF pays 50% of the net value after the lump sum, which can be a huge amount. Obviously, it's thousands of pounds. So there's many widows we're concerned about, and many older pensioners who are going to default to the PPF because they just don't know what the document's about. We've had this 16-page document. And we are dealing with many members of family, the children of pensioners who are very worried about the elderly mother or elderly father who's got this big document and don't understand. Now, we're providing help with those, but as I say, the number of people who are watching our Facebook page. So the first action was to try and get it into the newspapers. And we did that. We got into most of the local newspapers. And we also got onto local TV just in one area. Other TV companies didn't see it as important. We've also been in a few national papers, including the Financial Times and the Sunday Times and Daily Telegraph, Daily Mail. So we've been trying to get the message out that way as well. And recently, the government-backed Pensions Advisory Service have joined us, and they have a dedicated helpline for British Steel members. So it's been taken extremely serious by some groups in Parliament as well. But I mean, the basis of this, if we think back, why are we here at all? The pension scheme is in a very good, strong state. The only reason we're here is that Tata could not get a partnership to get the synergy of a strong volume in Europe as long as they were tied to the pension fund. And Tata, obviously, as a global business, they're not in difficulty.
Right.
But they were able to use the fact that the UK division is separate, legally separate, to show that that company was insolvent. which is one of the rules in the UK. The company's got to be shown to be insolvent within 12 months. This happened before, as I say, with Kodak, for example. Eastman Kodak were under Chapter 11 in the US, so they showed Kodak UK were in difficulty and separated from Kodak UK for the benefit of Kodak UK. Other companies have done similar. The usual process is that the company first of all closes its existing scheme to new to accruals. So the scheme was closed to new members in March of this year, and then it transitions, and the usual process is then we go into either the PPF or the REA. Now, what we are seeing is there's a number of other companies, very large pension funds, doing similar. British Airways, British Telecom, the Royal Mail, who were much bigger even than the British Steel scheme, are all on the route. They're starting the first steps, closing their schemes to active members. So there's no, there's just like our scheme, there were no active members. So it's happening more widely now. And there is a concern that we will see more companies becoming aware of this mechanism as a means of severing their ties to what is a costly defined benefit final salary scheme. So there is a concern we're going to see a lot more of that now. And it will, instead of the trickle we've seen over the last few years, it will become a flood of people trying to use this mechanism, particularly international companies with UK subsidiaries.
Right. In other words, closing down defined benefit schemes in order to avoid the costs. Is that what you're saying?
For the liability. Right. I mean, under the law, 1995, there was the 1995 Pensions Act, and under the law, they cannot reduce the benefits without the members' consent. And not many members are going to vote to have reduced pensions.
Right.
Yeah. Even though it would in our case, it's in the benefit of the pensioners to accept it. So it might have been better to have negotiated a reduced level and got better than BSPS2. However, the law doesn't allow that. The law is very much you either are in the pension fund or the pension fund stops and you go into PPF. But companies now could look from outside and say, if we've got a pension scheme, a defined benefit pension scheme, which is requiring annual support, annual funding, and that is, we're an international company and it's supported by a legal entity, a UK subsidiary, they can now see that all you've got to do is show the regulator that the company cannot continue if it does that alone. Now, the support to the British Steel Pension Fund up until last year wasn't coming from TSUK. It was coming via TSUK from Tata India. So other companies could see the example of Tata India and say, we could force this to happen. We could say that we cannot continue funding this. The UK subsidiary would fail. And then, with the agreement of the pensions regulator and UK government, walk away. But as Tata are doing, Tata are coming back. The British Steel Pension Scheme too. Sorry, the one very important fact is the new scheme will be sponsored by Tata UK. So they had to walk away from the old scheme because it was too expensive and a drain on funding. Having walked away, they're now coming back. And the new scheme with the benefits, the level of benefits it will have, will actually start off with about £1.5 billion worth of surplus against liabilities. So the existing liabilities were too much. They walked away, and then they're coming back to a new scheme. And that is legally possible because the new scheme, the members have to give their consent to join the new scheme. Okay, so they couldn't get our legal consent a year ago, but by effectively closing the scheme and reopening, they can make us accept lower benefits.
Right.
Yeah.
I have a couple of quick questions. I think we're running out of our 45 minutes soon. Were you involved in negotiating with the company or the regulators? Were you involved in actually any negotiations?
No. That's one big concern we have. I spoke and wrote to the regulators. As far as the regulators are concerned, the stakeholders who were involved in the negotiations are the company, Tata Steel UK, the British Steel Pension Trustees, the Payment Protection Fund, and the Pensions Regulator. They say that the members' voice in that, our voice, is through the trustees, that the trustees are our representatives there. So the members individually cannot be involved in the negotiations. Or, there's no consultation on it. It's not like we can write to the government that we can, So, and I wrote to the pensions regulator, and the pensions regulator has been very good. They've written answers back to me. And they basically said, no, we don't have any rights to be involved in the negotiations. We question that from the point of the European Court of Human Rights. And they said, no, because we have a right to be involved in anything that the government agencies that affect us. But they said, no, that's been tested. So the members were not involved at all. The members were not allowed to be involved in the actual decision making. Mm-hmm. Now, the trustees, who are the trustees? Well, the trustees are primarily, almost 50% of them are company nominated people. Mm-hmm. So, and the other 50%, almost all of them, are union nominated people. Now, if you look at the 82,000 members, pensioners, very few of them ever worked for Tata. Most of them left before Tata bought Chorus in 2008. And the other thing is, most of them don't belong to a union. So the people who are negotiating for us are from so that is something I know the Work and Pensions Committee will be looking at, because we've asked them to look at that. But the government agencies have been very good on this. The payment told us what's happened and why it happened, and they've given us a direct line to the person who was involved in the negotiations, the lead person in the pensions regulator, and they're quite open about what happened under the law.
Did you work with the unions very much?
Did your
group work with the unions at all?
We tried to approach the unions. One or two of the people are still union members. The unions have taken the view that the potential job losses in Wales were far more important. Remember, Tata threatened to stop investment and make Tata Steel UK insolvent. Mm-hmm. So in May 2016, the government, all the local politicians, the Welsh Assembly and the unions were very concerned about job losses. There's about 4,000 people. That was their priority. The fund, the British Steel Pension Fund, had to be severed to keep those losses.
Mm-hmm.
Had to be let free. So the union's priority was for the jobs, not the pension fund. And in fact, where one of the union representatives from the community union went to Parliament with the trustees and did tell Parliament that the deal we have got, the British Steel Pension Scheme 2, is the best deal they could have got.
Right.
And the there is a joint committee of all the unions involved, and their statement on August the 11th, when the process was approved or announced, they were all for the scheme. So there's nothing the unions would do. They'd made their decision. It was for the jobs. They'd agreed this process going forward was to have the new scheme is better than not having it. If we'd gone straight to PPF, many members would be financially worse off. So as far as the unions are concerned, the successor schemes is the best deal we could have got.
Right.
Yeah, our group, we think that the legal minimum benefits, which is what we're being offered, or what is part of the new scheme, could have been set higher. We could have had higher than legal minimum. Now, in the meantime, in the last few weeks, the
Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. In the meantime, in the last few weeks, the British Steel trustees have informed us all that in 3 years' time, they will look at the position of the assets and liabilities, and they have promised in a document that if the assets are sufficiently grown, that they will then give a one-off benefit to those people who have been affected by the pre-1997 service. Mm-hmm. So there has been some movement, but it's a promise. It's what we say is jam tomorrow.
Right. It's not written down anywhere.
It's not written into the rules. So,
Stefan, thank you very much for everything. One very last question: what do you think should be changed in the law? Given your experience, what changes would you suggest?
Right. Well, for the main thing is that I think the government needs to look at whether the regulated apportionment arrangement that was originally drawn up, whether it's being used as a mechanism to allow an international company to walk away from its responsibilities. Now, I know the pensions regulator has said not in this case. They believe it's the best deal that was possible. Mm-hmm. Now, what should be looked at is whether there's an alternative for defined benefit schemes. There's a problem with defined benefit schemes. Many of them are currently showing underfunding. Now, what is Parliament has just announced it's going to look again at defined ambition schemes, very similar to what is available in Holland and Germany, where schemes like ours can get together with other schemes under another set of trustees and being run as a larger concern with an ambition of a pension rather than a guaranteed pension that defined benefit. So under the defined benefit scheme, there's no risks on my shoulders. It's all with the trustees. Under a defined contribution scheme, all the risk is on my shoulders. So what they're looking at is the defined ambition again, or EDC, collective defined contribution. Now, this is in place in certain provinces in Canada. New Brunswick was first, I think, and others are looking at it now. It's been in place in Holland for some time. The Germans have it. So they're looking at this as being a staging point. Instead of going defined benefit to the defined contribution or PPF, that there's another level in between where the members accept that they would take some of the risk, that it would still be a definite benefit, but the benefits above the definite pension, the indexation could be flexed to suit the asset position. So that's one of the things I see as being a possibility of the future. Now, it split the financial industry right down the middle,
right.
Polarised the financial industry some years ago. But that's the only way I see it. I mean, as far as legislation, we've got plenty of legislation on the book. What we need is a solution and an outcome somewhere between what we've currently got with the RAA and PPF and the original DB scheme. And that solution, the best solution on the table at the moment, appears to be some form of defined ambition scheme. And I would hope that the government now takes that through to completion. It was originally discussed in 2015. Had it been available, had they progressed that work and it would have been available now, it would have been a better solution for our members.
Stefan,
so I'm hoping that they get that through for other schemes in the future.
Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I hope we meet again before too long. Thank you.
Okay, Terry.
Thank you very much again. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. And you.